Freud's paradigm begins with an array of unconscious defenses that individuals deploy to protect their egos against anxiety, guilt, and internal conflict. Denial stands as the most primitive of these maneuvers, a psychic refusal to acknowledge an uncomfortable reality. In the office context, an employee might refuse to accept that budget cuts threaten the team's viability, insisting repeatedly that resources are secure despite mounting evidence to the contrary. This mechanism serves to keep anxiety at bay by creating a psychological wall between the individual and the painful truth. When left unchecked, denial festers, breeding frustration among co-workers who perceive a willful blindness, while the denier remains oblivious to the genuine stakes of the situation. Projection represents the second pillar in this defensive trinity, a dynamic wherein the individual attributes his or her own unacceptable feelings or impulses to another person. Within workplace disputes, projection often surfaces as blame. A manager who harbors insecurity about their leadership competence may accuse team members of disloyalty or slacking off. The projection then intensifies conflict by shifting the focus from internal turmoil to external targets. The projected content feels tangible to both parties, as the accused invariably responds defensively, creating a feedback loop in which each side's inflated anxieties reinforce the other's projected narrative. Displacement functions as a slightly more sophisticated redirection of emotion. Unlike projection, which thrusts one's internal state onto another, displacement channels the emotion toward a safer or more accessible substitute. Picture an employee reprimanded by their superior for missing a deadline. Without healthy outlets to process shame or resentment, that worker might later lash out at a subordinate over a trivial formatting mistake. The original source of anger, fear of failure or humiliation, remains unconscious while the displaced target receives the brunt of the hostility. Freud emphasized that these defenses operate on an unconscious level, emerging automatically whenever inner conflict threatens ego equilibrium. Denial, projection, and displacement belong to a broader hierarchy of defenses, but their potency in the work environment derives from the constant interplay between personal insecurities and organizational pressures. An employee's buried fear of incompetence collides with performance evaluations. A manager's suppressed resentment toward corporate edicts encounters frontline staff grievances. A team's collective anxieties over reorganization find expression in rumor mills and passive-aggressive emails. Without awareness of these defenses, participants remain trapped in cyclical exchanges that mimic warfare more than collaboration. Crucially, denial, projection, and displacement share a common function. They reduce immediate psychic distress by circumventing direct confrontation with unwanted impulses. However, because the underlying conflicts remain unaddressed, the defenses perpetuate tension over time. Imagine a department plagued by rumors of downsizing. Denial might manifest in repeated assurances from leadership, even when numbers suggest cuts are imminent. Projected blame toward disloyal employees who spread rumors intensifies mistrust, and displaced frustration surfaces in hostile interdepartmental communications. The original source, a lack of transparent communication, remains hidden beneath layers of defensive maneuvering. Moreover, these defenses possess a contagious quality. Individuals in group settings tend to adopt similar defense patterns as they unconsciously resonate with one another's anxieties. When one team member projects blame onto another, observers may internalize that blame or displace it onto third parties, like support staff or vendors. Denial of organizational challenges can spread like a virus when employees reinforce one another's comforting illusions rather than questioning them. Displacement fuels a covert culture of scapegoating, distracting from structural issues such as unrealistic deadlines or misaligned priorities. Freud taught that only by illuminating the defense mechanisms can an individual begin to dismantle them. The act of naming a defense brings it into the realm of conscious scrutiny, weakening its automatic grip. In the context of recurring work conflicts, the first step involves identifying when one is in denial, catching oneself thinking, "This problem doesn't exist," and gently challenging that thought with evidence. Next, noticing projection requires pausing in moments of blame and asking, "Am I accusing this person of qualities I actually feel in myself?" Displacement can be detected by tracking fluctuations in mood, observing whether anger toward a project or system abruptly vanishes when redirected at a colleague. Such self-awareness does not occur overnight. Repeated practice of introspective journaling, perhaps recording moments of workplace tension alongside one's internal reactions, begins to reveal patterns. Over time, the psychic energy consumed by maintaining defensive defensiveness diminishes, freeing space for genuine problem-solving and empathy. In sum, the foundation of Freud's defense trinity, denial, projection, displacement, provides a powerful lens for understanding why seemingly trivial issues at work can escalate into repetitive and unresolved disputes. These mechanisms offer temporary relief from anxiety at the cost of long-term dysfunction. Only by shining the light of consciousness on these defenses can individuals break the cycle, transforming workplace conflict into an opportunity for collective growth and psychological maturity. In the modern office environment, certain recurrent triggers act as catalysts that propel Freud's defense mechanisms into full operation, transforming routine interactions into arenas of psychological contention. One primary trigger arises from ambiguous power dynamics. When an employee perceives their role as poorly defined, the unconscious fear of incompetence or inadequacy can ignite denial and projection. For example, a mid-level manager uncertain about their decision-making authority may unconsciously deny any responsibility for team failures, brushing off constructive feedback as unjustified. Simultaneously, they may project underlying self-doubt onto colleagues, accusing them of undermining leadership. The ambiguity of hierarchical boundaries thus becomes fertile ground for defenses to flourish. Secondly, high-stakes performance evaluations often trigger displacement. Annual reviews, sales targets, or project deadlines carry emotional weight that extends beyond objective metrics. When an individual experiences anxiety about meeting expectations, the ID's raw impulses, fear of failure, shame, cannot be directly expressed to superiors. Instead, these intense emotions displace onto more accessible objects, such as office equipment, team members, or even minor glitches in software. A salesperson criticized for missing a quota might slam down the phone receiver or snap at the receptionist, unconsciously displacing frustration onto a safe outlet. These displaced responses perpetuate conflict loops until the latent performance anxiety is addressed. Another potent trigger rests in resource scarcity, whether real or perceived. Limited budgets, time constraints, or understaffing provoke a collective sense of threat. Groups experiencing resource scarcity often unleash projection as a means of preserving self-image. Team members might accuse one another of hoarding information or resources, attributing selfish motives where genuine competition or survival instincts reside. The projection of scarcity fears onto colleagues diverts attention from systemic issues, such as inadequate staffing or flawed processes, and instead transforms interpersonal relationships into battlegrounds of mistrust. Unclear communication channels also serve as a catalyst for denial. When directives from leadership arrive in fragmented or contradictory form, employees may deny the existence of conflicting messages, aligning with the assertion that everything is fine to avoid cognitive dissonance. This denial solidifies false consensus, allowing rumors to sprout in the void of clarity. As whispers fill the silence, projection and displacement quickly take root, each employee externalizing their anxiety in different ways, blaming absent managers, ridiculing peers, or exaggerating minor inconveniences. The result is a cacophony of unconscious defenses obscuring the real communication breakdown. Interpersonal comparisons represent a psychological pressure point as well. In cultures where performance metrics, sales numbers, or publication counts determine status, envy stirs beneath the surface. Here, projection mingles with envy, as individuals attribute their own desires for recognition to rivals. A colleague who achieves rapid success may be labeled as manipulative or unethical, not because of observable behavior, but as an unconscious projection of one's own ambition and guilt. These projected narratives poison the social climate, impeding collaboration and breeding isolation. Micromanagement is yet another trigger that activates defense machinery. When employees feel constantly scrutinized, the superego's punitive voice amplifies, heightening moral anxiety and shame. In response, denial can manifest as feigned compliance or exaggerated optimism. This project is well on track, despite overwhelming evidence to the contrary. Displacement may surface as passive-aggressive gestures, like delayed email responses or superficial task completion. The micromanaged individual unconsciously defends the ego against perceived moral failure by diverting frustrations into covert behaviors. Workplace gossip and informal networks play a dual role as trigger and amplifier. Gossip provides a channel for projection to spread rapidly. An individual nursing resentment toward a supervisor might circulate stories of favoritism or poor decision-making, projecting their own discontent onto the leader. As gossip permeates the office, denial arises among those uncomfortable confronting the rumors, allowing unverified claims to solidify into accepted truths. This social reinforcement solidifies defense patterns in collective consciousness, making them more resistant to challenge. The trigger of rapid organizational change, mergers, restructurings, or leadership shifts set off a complex interplay of defenses. Anxiety about an uncertain future stimulates denial. Employees reassure themselves that nothing will change, clinging to familiar routines. When change inevitably arrives, projection surfaces in accusations that those spearheading transformation are power-hungry or callous. Displacement appears as frustration with mundane tasks rather than systemic upheaval. The unconscious struggle to adapt to change morphs into interpersonal skirmishes that obscure the structural causes of anxiety. Finally, personal life stressors intersect with workplace triggers to amplify defense responses. An employee grappling with financial worries or family conflict arrives at the office with heightened vulnerability. The stress spillover intensifies projection onto colleagues. Minor mistakes become intolerable provocations and magnifies denial of organizational strains. The compounded effect of outside pressures and work-related ambiguity can render defenses more rigid and inflexible, making resolution elusive. Understanding these workplace triggers, ambiguous hierarchies, performance evaluations, resource scarcity, unclear communication, comparative envy, micromanagement, gossip, organizational change, and personal stress reveals the psychological terrain across which Freud's defense mechanisms operate. Recognition of these catalysts enables individuals and organizations to anticipate points of friction and institute preventive measures. By clarifying roles, improving transparency, fostering supportive feedback, and encouraging open dialogue, workplaces can mitigate the unconscious activation of denial, projection, and displacement. Such proactive environments not only reduce the frequency of recurring conflicts, but also provide fertile ground for conscious resolution and genuine collaboration. Freud's approach to unraveling recurring work conflicts employs a rigorous self-inquiry method that guides individuals to trace each dispute back through successive layers of conscious and unconscious motivation. First, the individual must pause at the moment of emotional intensity, when irritation, anger, or anxiety peaks, and commit to an internal query. What am I feeling right now beneath my reaction? This initial step of labeling the primary emotion, whether it be fear, shame, envy, or guilt, begins the excavation process. By assigning a name to the immediate sensation, the person gains a foothold in conscious awareness, momentarily interrupting the defense mechanism that would otherwise hijack their response. Next, the inquirer identifies the trigger event in objective terms. Instead of describing the experience with evaluative language, "My colleague was rude," the individual records neutral facts. "My colleague interrupted my report presentation at 10:05 a.m. Distinguishing facts from interpretations prevents projection from coloring the inquiry. At this stage, any impulsive attribution, blaming the colleague for incompetence or malice, is bracketed as hypothesis rather than fact, to be tested later against inner material. This disciplined separation of event and evaluation weakens projection, the defense that would otherwise transform colleague behavior into a personal indictment. The third phase invites the person to connect the identified emotion to its unconscious roots by asking, "When have I felt this feeling before, outside of this situation?" This association exercise calls upon autobiographical memory. Perhaps the irritation at being interrupted echoes childhood experiences of parental dismissal, or the shame at missing a deadline recalls early school humiliation. Documenting parallel instances, situations in which the same underlying emotion emerged, uncovers repeating patterns of unresolved psychic material. Each recalled example offers clues about the origin of the emotional charge, exposing the unconscious desire or fear that feeds the conflict cycle. Once these prior experiences surface, the inquiry turns inward. What unconscious belief or impulse underlies these feelings? Here, the individual probes for defenses such as denial, "I must be perfect," or displacement, "I'll vent frustration at someone less threatening." Naming the defense mechanism dissolves its automaticity by bringing it into conscious scrutiny. The person then reflects on the belief driving the defense: perfectionism as a shield against criticism, scapegoating as a means to avoid internal self-blame, or preemptive aggression to mask vulnerability. Articulating these unconscious commitments transforms them from obscure forces into explicit hypotheses to be tested against reality. In the fourth step, the inquirer tests these hypotheses through dialogue or journaling. Writing a letter unsent to the colleague or supervisor lays bare both factual disagreements and the personal meaning attached to them. The letter describes the event, the emotional impact, and the emerging insight into unconscious patterns, all in clear, unemotional language. This exercise serves multiple functions. It clarifies thought, externalizes the internal narrative, and reveals any lingering distortions. Rereading the draft with an eye for exaggerated or self-pitying language flags residual defense mechanisms. The draft then becomes a blueprint for an honest conversation, should the individual choose to address the conflict directly. Following this, the individual engages in a reality-testing dialogue, either with a trusted mentor or via inner Socratic questioning. Phrases such as, "Is it true that my worth depends entirely on this outcome?" Or, "Could my reaction be more about past experience than present behavior?" challenge unconscious assumptions. By systematically disputing distorted premises, the ego strengthens its mediating function. This phase erodes denial by confronting inconvenient truths and counters projection by owning one's feelings rather than attributing them to others. Next, the person conceptualizes an adaptive response based on newly gained insight. If perfectionism propels chronic conflict, they may set realistic performance benchmarks accompanied by self-affirmation scripts to soothe the superego's harsh demands. If envy or rivalry underpins tension with a peer, the individual might consciously practice identifying genuine qualities to admire and emulate. Each adaptive strategy addresses the specific defense mechanism and its originating belief, ensuring that subsequent interactions do not merely resurface the same patterns. Finally, the inquirer embeds these insights into daily practice through ongoing self-observation and periodic reflection. A conflict diary, maintained for several weeks, records triggers, emotional labels, uncovered beliefs, and adaptive responses. Reviewing this log highlights both progress and remaining blind spots. Periodic self-inquiry meetings or supervision sessions reinforce commitment to conscious resolution. Over time, recurring defense activations diminish in frequency and intensity, and disputes transform from chaotic eruptions into structured dialogues grounded in mutual understanding. Freud's step-by-step self-inquiry reorients individuals from reactive combatants to reflective participants. By systematically naming emotions, distinguishing fact from projection, tracing unconscious origins, testing hypotheses, and formulating adaptive responses, each person becomes equipped to dismantle the psychological machinery that fuels endless work conflicts. This method yields not only short-term relief, but also cultivates a durable capacity for self-awareness and mature engagement within the workplace. Conscious resolution demands targeted interventions that directly counter Freud's defensive maneuvers and cultivate healthier interaction patterns. The first tool involves reality-focused dialogue, founded on the principle of clarifying facts before emotions. Participants commit to stating observations without evaluative language, such as "the report was submitted 2 hours late," rather than "you're always irresponsible." This factual framing neutralizes projection by keeping discussions anchored in objective reality. The speaker acknowledges personal feelings separately. "I felt anxious when the report was late," which asserts ownership over internal states and prevents displacement of anger onto others. By distinguishing facts from emotional reactions, reality-focused dialogue dismantles the scaffolding of denial and projection, allowing the group to address substantive issues rather than battling over subjective interpretations. A second technique employs guided self-disclosure, in which each party shares the unconscious belief or fear uncovered through self-inquiry. For instance, an employee might reveal, "I fear being judged incompetent," while a manager admits, "I worry about losing control." This mutual disclosure transforms private anxieties into shared human experiences, fostering empathy. When individuals hear their colleagues' hidden motivations, they recognize the defense mechanisms at work, denial of uncertainty or projection of criticism, and recalibrate their responses. Self-disclosure sessions can take the form of structured meetings, where each person speaks uninterrupted for a few minutes, or written reflections exchanged in advance. The key lies in exposing unconscious material and creating a container for understanding rather than perpetuating conflict through hidden resentments. A third resolution tool centers on active empathy exercises designed to weaken displacement. After identifying the true source of anger, say, performance anxiety triggered by looming deadlines, team members engage in role reversal dialogue. Each individual speaks as though they are the person they conflict with, articulating that person's perspective and underlying concerns. In doing so, participants confront their own projections, realizing that the colleague's behavior may stem from similar fears or systemic pressures. Role reversal reveals displaced hostility as misdirected energy and redirects it toward collaborative problem solving. Regular empathy drills institutionalize this practice, gradually shifting team culture from adversarial to supportive. The fourth intervention leverages boundary-setting protocols to contain denial. Clear agreements define what topics are open for discussion, deadlines for decisions, and channels for feedback. By establishing transparent norms such as weekly progress check-ins, shared project dashboards, and defined escalation pathways, ambiguity diminishes. When employees know exactly whose responsibility each task falls under, and when feedback will occur, denial of organizational issues loses its protective appeal. Workspace agreements substitute psychic avoidance with collective accountability, reducing the unconscious temptation to dismiss or ignore rising problems. A fifth technique involves journaling with guided prompts that align with Freudian insight. Prompts such as describe a recent conflict and note moments of certainty versus doubt, or list emotions felt when anticipating feedback and uncover their possible origins, direct attention toward defense patterns. Entries focus on labeling defenses. I denied that I felt overwhelmed, and exploring antecedent beliefs. I believed I must succeed at all costs. Over weeks, this habitual reflection builds metacognitive awareness. As individuals document progress and setbacks, they witness the gradual erosion of automatic defenses and the emergence of conscious choice. Group sharing of anonymized insights further strengthens communal self-awareness. A complementary tool draws from psychoanalytic play therapy, symbolic enactment, adapted for adults. Teams convene to dramatize conflict scenarios using role play with props or metaphors. For example, a box labeled deadline might serve as a symbolic container for collective anxiety. Participants manipulate and discuss the box, its size, weight, texture, assigning it emotional meaning. These symbolic gestures externalize unconscious dynamics, rendering them discussable in concrete terms. The creative dimension momentarily bypasses rigid defenses, enabling new perspectives and collaborative solutions to surface. Another resolution strategy emphasizes ego-building rituals that counteract destructive superego demands. After a successful collaborative milestone, no matter how small, the team celebrates with affirmations acknowledging both effort and vulnerability. We faced uncertainty and supported each other. Such rituals validate the ego's capacity to mediate between ID impulses and superego perfectionism, reinforcing the belief that imperfection need not trigger shame. Over time, ritualized recognition diminishes internalized guilt and reduces the compulsion toward denial or displacement when setbacks occur. Mindfulness-based group exercises provide a final layer of defense deactivation. Short guided sessions focus on noticing bodily sensations, muscle tension in the shoulders, or a flutter in the chest during conflict discussions. Participants practice returning attention from aggressive reactions to bodily awareness, interrupting the cascade of unconscious defenses. By integrating moment-to-moment mindfulness into team interactions, automatic patterns lose momentum. Regular practice fosters a collective capacity to pause, observe inner experiences, and choose responses aligned with shared objectives rather than unconscious fears. Together, these tools establish a comprehensive toolkit for conscious resolution. Reality-focused dialogue directly counters projection and denial. Guided self-disclosure reveals hidden anxieties. Empathy exercises dismantle displacement. Boundary protocols eliminate ambiguity. Journaling cultivates persistent introspection. Symbolic enactments externalize defenses. Ego-building rituals nurture healthy self-regard. Mindfulness interrupts automatic reactions. By embedding these techniques into organizational routines, team charters, regular workshops, and reflective practices, workplace conflicts transform from repetitive skirmishes into opportunities for collective growth. Freud's legacy thus finds new life in the modern office, offering lasting pathways to harmony and psychological maturity. Freud's ultimate goal in addressing endless work conflicts involves not just temporary relief, but the cultivation of enduring psychological vigilance that prevents defense mechanisms from reasserting themselves. The advanced strategies begin with periodic psychoanalytic self-audits, scheduled moments of introspection during which individuals map recent interactions against known defense patterns. By reviewing conflict diaries at weekly or monthly intervals, employees can detect early signs of denial, projection, or displacement before these defenses escalate into full-blown disputes. For example, a brief audit might reveal that despite initial recognition of anxiety over an upcoming presentation, the person reverted to denial by downplaying preparation needs. Catching this slip allows for timely corrective measures, such as seeking mentorship or allocating rehearsal time. Complementing self-audits, Freud advocates cultivating a conflict witness mindset within teams. A designated observer, ideally a trained facilitator or rotating team member, monitors group dynamics for defense triggers. This person learns to notice linguistic cues, nonverbal tension, and recurring complaints that signal unconscious processes at work. When patterns emerge, the witness gently interrupts discussions, pointing out observable defenses. "I notice we're attributing blame without clarifying facts," or "there seems to be a shift from problem-solving to personal criticism." This external feedback functions as a collective ego strengthener, reinforcing reality-focused dialogue and preventing defenses from gaining momentum. Another key strategy involves embedding reflective pauses into meeting protocols. At pivotal junctures, when feedback sessions become heated or decision points loom, participants take a 2-minute silence to note their internal reactions. Each person writes a brief adjective reflecting their primary emotion, then shares it without explanation. This practice externalizes internal states, disrupting displacement by bringing unspoken feelings to the group's attention. The reflective pause transforms reactive emotional surges into conscious data the whole team can consider, fostering a climate of mutual awareness. Freud also underscores the value of defense anticipation in high-stress scenarios. Before embarking on challenging tasks, such as merger negotiations or major product launches, teams engage in pre-mortem analyses of potential defense activations. They list worst-case psychological dynamics, denial of market risks, projection of insecurities onto competitors, displacement of frustration onto internal processes. By naming these potential pitfalls in advance, the group neutralizes their unconscious power. The pre-mortem not only readies participants to spot defenses in real time, but also primes them to deploy reality-focused questions when emotions flare, like "What evidence supports our optimism?" or "Am I redirecting my frustration appropriately?" Maintaining psychological health in the workplace further benefits from establishing peer supervision partnerships. Pairs or small clusters of colleagues agree to confidential check-ins, during which they share recent conflicts and receive gentle challenge questions. "When you said X, did you feel threatened?" Or "Could you explore whether that reaction relates to something outside work?" These partnerships mirror psychoanalytic transference dialogue, offering safe spaces for defense identification and emotional processing. The regularity of peer supervision reinforces consistent introspection and diminishes reliance on maladaptive defenses. Freud's final strategy advocates institutionalizing symbolic closure rituals for conflict resolution. At the conclusion of a resolved dispute, whether through negotiation or mutual concession, participants convene for a brief ceremonial acknowledgement. This may involve collectively placing a small object, such as a token or stone, into a shared container labeled "resolved." Verbal affirmations accompany the act. "We recognize our shared responsibility," or "We appreciate the effort to understand and collaborate." The ritual externalizes resolution, symbolically burying the defenses that fueled the conflict and marking a psychological transition back to cooperative interaction. Such symbolic acts tap into Freud's understanding of unconscious symbolism, reinforcing conscious intention with embodied ceremony. To sustain these practices, leadership plays a critical role by modeling defense awareness and endorsing psychoanalytic tools. Managers share their own defense audits in team forums, normalizing vulnerability and signaling that acknowledging unconscious patterns is a mark of strength rather than weakness. Organizational policies can integrate brief reflective pauses into meeting agendas, designate conflict witnesses, and schedule peer supervision windows. Training sessions on Freudian defense mechanisms, tailored to workplace scenarios, provide foundational knowledge that empowers employees to recognize and address their own patterns. patterns. Finally, cultivating a culture of ongoing learning ensures that these strategies evolve alongside organizational changes. Periodic retreats or workshops revisit Freud's concepts, challenge assumptions, and introduce new variations on conflict resolution tools, such as digital platforms for anonymous defense reporting or art-based symbolic enactment for complex disputes. By keeping psychoanalytic insights at the forefront, businesses transform from reactive conflict zones into proactive communities of psychological maturity. Through these advanced strategies, Freud's legacy transcends the consulting room, offering a comprehensive blueprint for breaking conflict loops forever. The combination of self-audits, conflict witnesses, reflective pauses, defense anticipation, peer supervision, symbolic closure rituals, and leadership modeling weaves defense awareness into the fabric of organizational life. As these practices take root, denial loses its grip, projection yields to empathy, and displacement gives way to direct expression. Endless work conflicts cease to define the workplace, replaced by a dynamic culture of conscious collaboration and sustained psychological growth.